Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Monday, the 8th of September. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Paris, where the French Prime Minister looks likely to lose his job and collapse the government in a crunch confidence vote with major political and economic repercussions.
And in other news, the yen drops as Japan's Ishiba announces he will step down, paving the way for a new leader. Plus, HSBC's biggest shake-up in a decade has raised the stakes for CEO Georges Hedry. We assess how he's doing 1 year into the top job at Europe's biggest bank. Let's start with a roundup of our top stories. France's government is expected to collapse today, with Prime Minister Francois Bayrou expected to lose a confidence vote in Parliament. Bayrou called the vote in a bid to pressure lawmakers into backing his budget plan, which includes spending cuts and tax hikes aimed at bringing the country's ballooning debt under control. France's fiscal deficit is already the widest in the euro area and is on course to grow further, with the cost of servicing it set to hit 75 billion euros next year. Now, here's what Prime Minister Francois Bayrou said on French TV.
We are experiencing a situation that threatens the very future of the country, and everyone is whistling as if it doesn't exist. Everyone is looking the other way. Everyone is using the answers we could have provided to gain electoral advantage.
Francois Bayrou speaking there. Now, President Emmanuel Macron faces limited options if his government falls. He could name a new prime minister or call fresh elections for the National Assembly, but neither option is likely to improve the country's fiscal outlook in the near future, and further political turmoil will put increased pressure on French government bond yields. Now, Shigeru Ishiba has announced that he plans to step down as Japan's Prime Minister. The move follows calls for his resignation after back-to-back election losses that cost his LDP party its parliamentary majority. Japan's currency has already slid 0.5% against the US dollar on concerns political instability will reduce the prospect of the Bank of Japan raising interest rates. Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba announced his decision at a news conference on Sunday.
I have been considering that it is this administration's task to set a course for negotiation with the United States regarding the tariffs, which one can refer to as a national crisis. Last Friday, the Memorandum of Understanding on Investments was signed, and the U.S. President's executive order was issued. With the other day's report from Minister Akazawa, I felt I have reached a milestone.
Prime Minister Ishiba says that he will stay on as Prime Minister until his successor is named. However, with no clear options, his departure is likely to fuel uncertainty among investors over the coming weeks until a new leader is chosen. An immigration raid on an electric vehicle battery plant in Georgia in the United States, run by two South Korean companies, has rattled officials in Seoul. It comes less than 2 weeks after South Korean President Lee Jae-myung met with President Donald Trump in the White House, and Korean firms pledged to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in the US. Korean officials worked over the weekend to secure the release of 300 of its citizens detained by US Immigration and Customs Enforcement at a construction site for Hyundai Motor and LG Energy Solutions, their joint venture. President Trump spoke to reporters about the incident outside Air Force One.
We heard about it yesterday. At the same time, ICE was doing right because they were here illegally. But we do have to work something out where we bring in experts so that our people can be trained so that they can do it themselves. Does that make sense? Right? Is it straining the relationship with Korea at all? No, we have a great relationship with South Korea.
President Trump speaking there as the raid has put South Korean President Lee's government under pressure at home and threatens to become a major diplomatic issue with one of Washington's closest allies. OPEC Plus has backed a further rise in supply quotas, restarting 137,000 barrels a day of output from October and defying warnings. Traders had initially expected the organisation to pause production after firms including JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs advised that continuing with supply increases risked deepening a slump in prices. Bloomberg's Asia Energy team leader Stephen Stapczynski says the move does exhibit still a degree of caution.
There was a surprise aspect of it, but there was no awe. There was not an expectation that they would add the supply. Yes, the market was hedging their bets with the prices falling last week, and you did see that. But I think in the previous increases that they've had, where they surprised the market, there was that awe. There was more supply that they were adding. They're just adding about 130,000 barrels a day. That's compared to, it was about half of what we were seeing in the previous months when they're adding that tranche.
Bloomberg's Stephen Stapczynski speaking there. Brent crude futures already fell 3.9% last week amid signs that an increase was coming, something that may limit price downside, according to traders who spoke to Bloomberg. Pay for new workers is growing at its slowest pace since the pandemic, according to new data here in the UK. The poll by the Recruitment and Employment Confederation and KPMG found that starting pay growth for August cooled to levels last seen in early 2021. The numbers will make uncomfortable reading for the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer. He spent his weekend completing a wide-ranging government reshuffle after his deputy leader, Angela Rayner, resigned over her mishandling of her tax affairs. Defence Secretary John Healey, whose position remains unchanged, says that the new cabinet will now focus on delivery.
What Keir Starmer has done is put a new team in place and said to us all, you've got to go up a gear. And you've got to go up a gear to demonstrate that government can deliver for people. And what that means is that we've got to start to show that we can help change people's lives.
John Healey speaking there as the Labour Party continues to languish in the polls, with the Anti-Immigration Reform UK party, which won just 5 seats in last year's general election, to Labour's 411, consistently topping national surveys since April. And a major strike has begun on the London Underground. It will force several of the main lines on the network to shut down until the end of the working week. Members of the RMT union are striking over pay and pushing for a 4-day work week, a demand which the Transport for London authorities say it cannot afford to meet. The Centre for Economics and Business Research estimates that the walkouts could cost the UK economy about £230 million. So those are a few of our top stories this morning. I'm sure that people in London will be noting the 5 days effectively of London Underground travel stress and chaos. Yes, talking about that 32-hour working week that the union would like to see. Of course, they also want a 3.4% pay increase. So that's going to affect everybody this morning on their commute in the capital. Let's think about markets, though. So a lot of political turmoil in Japan, in France expected today. Japanese yen is weaker, 0.5% this morning. Bloomberg Dollar Spot Index is stronger right now. Looking at futures then for the start of European trading, actually reasonably positive. We're up by 0.4%. S&P 500 E-mini is gaining barely a tenth. 4.1% for US 10-year yields. French yields, of course, will begin trading at 3.44 on that 10-year yield. Oil prices actually surging despite the moves by OPEC Plus over the weekend. Brent crude futures up by 1.2% this morning. So those are the markets. In a moment, we're going to bring you more on the countdown to that crunch confidence vote in France with our own Stephen Cowell. Plus, we'll assess how HSBC's CEO is doing a year into the job. But before that, a story that caught my eye this morning that's just such a beautiful read. What is in a scent? A lot if you read Madison Derbyshire's beautiful essay. It begins with the disappointment about her washing up liquid, changing formula, changing scent. And it weaves its way to explaining why our sense of smell is thought to be the very first sense that we developed. And she explains, which I think is so interesting, why it raises memories and emotions so swiftly when you smell something. It's because it grew our sense of smell grew from apparently the same brain tissue that grew when we emerged from the primordial ooze. So she talks about the business of fragrances and flavours, and apparently, yes, fragrances are getting stronger, particularly in the US, but everywhere. It's a really lovely piece. I'll put a link to it in our show notes from Bloomberg's Madison, Derbyshire. Now, let's get to Paris. Stephen Carroll is there for us this morning, live in Paris, as we are counting down to this confidence vote later today, which looks likely to see the French government collapse. Good morning, Stephen. Really lovely to have you in Paris. Of course, you're usually in Brussels, but there for this important moment. Is there any hope that Francois Bayrou's government is actually going to win this vote?
If there is, it's pretty hard to find it. The papers today are already writing the end of the Bayrou premiership, and it's really been clear since this vote was called 2 weeks ago that there really was no hope for Francois Bayrou to be able to win this confidence vote, because the opposition parties from the far left to the far right said almost immediately that they would vote against the government. This is a simple majority vote, so abstentions don't really help that much. And looking at the parliamentary maths, you have a National Assembly divided roughly in three between the left wing, the centrist and the right wing blocks. It's very difficult to see how Bayrou could survive, and impossible if you listen to what the party leaders have said about how they're going to vote. Now, since he called this vote, Francois Bayrou has met all the political parties. He's been on every possible TV, radio and online media in the past fortnight trying to make his case for his budget, because this all comes down to, he announced his budget plan back in July of this year, and he's been talking about the scale of the country's debt problem, the need to bring down the deficit and the urgency with which that needs to be done. The efforts don't seem to really have done anything to win him new supporters. He will have a last chance to appeal to lawmakers when he begins the debate in the National Assembly later, but it looks like France is already heading for its fifth Prime Minister in just over 3 years.
And this is perhaps a common problem, isn't it, for indebted, developed economies? Nobody wants to make painful cuts or see difficult tax increases. But what happens if this French government falls, Stephen?
So if Bayrou loses this vote this afternoon or this evening, the government will resign immediately. It'll actually be the first time in modern French history that a government will have fallen on a confidence vote as opposed to a no confidence vote, which is what happened last December for Michel Barnier. And it then goes back to President Macron again. He has a choice to appoint a new Prime Minister to try again, where both Michel Barnier and Francois Bayrou failed with this current parliamentary configuration, or he has the option to call fresh elections to the National Assembly. That's something he couldn't do the last time around when the government fell in December. Now, he said he won't do that, so the speculation here in Paris is very much focused on who he might choose to take over from Francois Bayrou. He could pick another name from his own circle. The Justice Minister Gérald Darmanin is one of the names being circulated who could fit that profile. Or if he wants to try and change the parliamentary maths, the centre-left Socialist Party, who are not part of the current centrist coalition, have said they'd be willing to lead a government if they could advance their own budget plan, which involves less in terms of cuts, although still a reduction of public spending, and it does include measures like a wealth tax on fortunes of over 100 million euros. Essentially, the choice is Emmanuel Macron's if this vote doesn't go in favour of the government later. He's already meeting the President of the National Assembly this morning. He's been known to surprise us in the past, so I wouldn't put it past him doing something a bit unexpected.
OK, what does it mean then for the French economy, for the budgetary challenges?
Look, this is the crux of the matter. The French state is spending too much versus what it's taking in. It's piling up debt, as Francois Bayrou has reminded us many times over the past few weeks, at a rate of 5,000 euros per second. The budget plan that Bayrou put forward, which has been rejected by all the opposition parties, proposes cuts of 44 billion euros to the deficit to bring it down from the current 5.4% to 4.6% next year. It's already the widest in the euro area. Markets have essentially already priced in the Bayrou government falling. We've seen the spread between French and German borrowing costs widening to around 80 basis points since the vote was called. France's 30-year bond yield hit its highest since 2011 last week. The CAC 40's been underperforming, pressure on banks, home builders, domestically focused stocks. The longer the uncertainty goes on, the worse this situation is likely to get. There are a few very imminent deadlines. You've got ratings reviews in the coming week, including from Fitch this Friday. Could they move to downgrade French government debt? That could make the situation worse. And the budget process has to proceed no matter what. France has to submit a budget to the European Commission by mid-October, which will give whoever will be Prime Minister about a month, perhaps less than, to formulate a plan.
Oh, it's all very nail-biting. Stephen, thank you so much for being with us then and talking us through the stresses for France and this government vote, of course, later today. Thank you so much. You're going to be with us throughout the day, of course, taking us through everything that's happening in the politics in France. Stephen Cowell there, live in Paris. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this. Now, let's go to one of our deep dive stories this morning. HSBC CEO Georges Elhedery has spent his first year at the bank in a massive shake-up. The bank's share price has surged, but expenses have also soared. And now there are some doubts emerging. Joining us now to discuss this is Bloomberg Senior Asia Finance Correspondent Ambereen Chowdhury. Ambereen, thank you so much. You've done this long story in depth with a number of colleagues about Georges Elhedery. I mean, he's just about a year into this job. What has Elhedery done in terms of shrinking, refocusing the business? The overhaul was quite unexpected.
Yes, good morning. That's right. It's been around a year since he took over as CEO. And, to a huge extent, many people viewed him as the continuity chief because he's been at the bank for over 20 years. And all these changes have taken investors by surprise. So essentially, over the past 12 months, like a man on a mission, the new CEO has embarked on the biggest overhaul the bank has seen in at least a decade. So he's ripped up much of his inheritance. He first of all, reorganized the bank into 4 new divisions. He shut some businesses his predecessors once considered key to the lender's future. And essentially, he stripped out layers of middle management to streamline decision-making. And in that process, he's cut hundreds of jobs, made a lot of people unhappy. And then, most importantly, in January, he basically upended life for the firm's investment bankers by gutting the majority of the investment banking business in Europe and the Americas, which again has caused a lot of issues with morale among staff at the bank over the past year.
But then the share price seemed to welcome all of this change. There are some doubts emerging about the future, though. Why?
That's right. So the shares have ridden a wave of investor confidence in UK lenders, surging around 44% to a record since he became CEO in early September. However, that rally is, slowly losing momentum. Investors, analysts, they're souring on HSBC stock, most betting they'll barely budge this year. So they've got a lot of challenges ahead. One is, there's quite a few. So first of all, we reported last month that HSBC is cutting ties with more than 1,000 wealthy Middle East clients, and that's linked to its private bank amid a Swiss probe into suspected money laundering. Then, as you say, they've got rising expenses, and that's linked to restructuring that was quite large in the most recent results. And also, it's got this background in its key markets of Hong Kong and mainland China, where it's battling a commercial real estate downturn in the property end. And, of course, they've got, the ongoing geopolitical uncertainty, which is keeping the bank on edge over the past year.
Absolutely. I mean, the ongoing US-China trade war. Just briefly, the next big test, replacing the chairman, Mark Tucker.
Yes, that is right. He's due to leave in the next few weeks. And so far, we've not at least seen any sort of public statement on who they're appointing, permanent or interim. It's one of the reasons maybe because, finding a replacement for Mark Tucker may be difficult to find. He actually oversaw 4 CEOs during his tenure at the bank, including 3 appointed, and he's wielded the type of hands-on control that most non-executive chairmen rarely assert. So investors, I guess, are waiting with interest on who the next person may be, internal or external.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.